Hey told me it was just business, but it never is. Not when it's your name on the sign. Not when it's your hands that bled into every plate. Not when it's your family's legacy they're gutting for likes and margins. My name is Marco DeLuca. I'm 39 years old, and for the last 8 years I poured every ounce of who I am into a restaurant that used to mean something. Hearth and Grain wasn't flashy, it wasn't trending on TikTok or showing up in influencer reels. But it was real, it was honest, and it was mine, at least I thought it was. Until Sienna Grant bought it. She walked in like she owned the world. And maybe in her mind she did. Founder of some flashy food tech startup just sold it for millions. She had the kind of confidence that comes with never being told no. The kind that sees craft as branding, not soul. She called me into her office one Wednesday afternoon, barely 3 weeks into ownership. Didn't even look up from her laptop when she said it. Your menu is too traditional for where I want to take this brand. That word, brand. I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I already knew where this was going. 2 weeks, she added. That should be enough time for transition. Of course, I said, calm, controlled. I don't think she expected that. I think she wanted me to argue, to grovel. Maybe she was used to that, people trying to convince her of their worth. But I've never begged someone to understand flavor they can't taste. Later that night, I stood at the edge of my kitchen watching Raphael move through the grill station like a dancer on stage. Chloe, delicate as ever, garnished desserts with a surgeon's precision. Ben balanced 6 tables without breaking a sweat. None of them knew what was coming. Not yet. I didn't tell them that night. I couldn't. Instead, after close, I sat alone at the bar. The overhead lights were off except for the dim glow above me. I ran my hand over the scratched oak countertop. I remembered every customer who'd cried over my grandmother's veal stew, every proposal that happened in booth 4, every regular who treated this place like their second home. And now, it would become something else entirely. I didn't always want to be a chef. Back in college, I was studying civil engineering. I thought I'd build bridges, real ones. I took a dishwashing job at a small trattoria just off campus to help cover books and rent. One night, the line cook called in sick and the owner shoved an apron in my hands. I had no clue what I was doing, but something clicked. The rhythm, the pressure, the heat, it was alive. 6 months later, I dropped out of school. My father didn't speak to me for a year. But my grandmother, Nonna Rosa, understood. She'd cooked for decades in Palermo. Her philosophy was simple: cook from memory, not measurements. Cook with intention, not ego. I carried that into every kitchen I entered, every dish I touched. And when I finally got my shot to run Hearth and Grain, then just a failing diner with torn booths and a forgettable menu, I rebuilt it from the ground up. I stripped it down to its bones, repainted, reimagined. Then I did what I knew best. I cooked. I brought in Nonna's recipes: hand-rolled tagliatelle, sardine-stuffed peppers, rustic lemon cake soaked in olive oil and honey. The kind of food that slows people down, makes them put down their phones, makes them remember. And it worked. Locals came first, then regional food critics, then the national press. Hearth and Grain became a quiet legend. But legends don't pay dividends, at least not fast enough for people like Sienna. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I arrived early. Earlier than usual. Raphael was already there chopping shallots. Chef, he asked, brow raised. I told him everything. His face changed. Anger, disbelief, betrayal. Then something harder: resolve. But this is your food, he said. Not anymore, I answered. He didn't argue, but he didn't look away either. That silence. It said more than words. As I packed my knives into their leather roll, something twisted in my gut. Not grief, not yet. Something sharper. Something quieter. Call it instinct. The kind that tells you a storm's coming before the clouds gather. The days that followed were quiet. I trained Kevin, her new executive chef, as professionally as I could. He was technically competent, obsessed with plating and textures, not flavors. He asked for my seasoning ratios. I gave him the ones written in the training guide. The ones that passed health inspection. Not the real ones. Not the ones that adjust depending on the humidity or the kind of garlic that came in that week. Not the ones my grandmother whispered into my ear while I watched her cook as a child. Sienna hovered, took notes, asked questions that made it painfully clear she had no idea how flavor really worked. She talked about Instagrammable plating and global fusion identity. Meanwhile, regulars started to ask questions. Marco, they said the lamb's not as tender this week. Marco, why does the tiramisu taste different? I just smiled, said I was stepping away, taking time to think, to breathe. I lied, but only a little. Because in truth, I wasn't retreating. I was remembering. 2 weeks went by faster than I expected. On my last night at Hearth and Grain, I didn't make a speech. I didn't want a party. I just cooked, like any other service. But with each dish that left the pass, my hands grew heavier, my chest quieter. When the final table paid and the kitchen lights dimmed, I walked into Sienna's office and placed 2 things on her polished concrete desk: my keys and a manila folder labeled Signature Recipes, Executive Copy. She didn't look up right away. When she finally did, she offered a smile that tried to be gracious. Thank you, Marco. You've been professional. I nodded, then left. No handshake, no final words, just silence. That night, back in my apartment, I opened a bottle of Barbera I'd been saving. Not for a celebration, just for something like closure. I sat on my balcony as the city lights of Asheville flickered around me and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a hollow space where 8 years of my life used to live. The morning after, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to read messages from Chloe or Raphael or Ben. I didn't want their sympathy or their rage. I needed stillness. Needed to listen to something quieter. But by day 3, Raphael was banging on my door, still in his kitchen whites, eyes wild. "It's a mess," he said, pushing past me into my living room. "Kevin can't get anything right." "They have the recipes," I said, calm. Raphael gave me a look. "They have what you wrote down, not what you actually did." I poured him a glass of water. We sat in silence. He continued, "Last night, Mrs. Randall sent back the veal, twice. Said it didn't taste like it used to, and she's never sent anything back." Mrs. Randall, the Thursday night regular who always said my food reminded her of her time in Sicily after her husband passed. She once cried over a bowl of my minestrone, said it brought her back. That struck something, not anger, not even pride, something deeper, a quiet injustice. "They're calling it Hearth and Grain Reinvented," Raphael added. "Big relaunch next week. Critics, investors, influencers. Sienna's turning it into a spectacle." I leaned back. The name burned in my chest like old grease fire. She wasn't just trying to change the food, she was trying to erase the soul. That night I couldn't sleep. I dug through my storage trunk and pulled out a leather-bound journal. My grandmother's. Worn and faded. Filled with scribbled recipes, ingredient notes, and little sketches of plates from back in Palermo. On the inside cover, in her shaky hand, she'd written, "The food remembers even when people forget." I ran my fingers over the words. I knew what I had to do, not out of vengeance, but because the memory mattered. The next morning, I called Raphael. "I've been thinking about my grandmother's old place," I said. "La Caseta," he asked. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "It's been sitting empty for years, still in my name. Maybe it's time." "You're thinking of reopening." I wasn't, I admitted, but maybe now. It's all I can think about. Raphael didn't hesitate. "I'm in." So were Chloe and Ben. One by one, they jumped ship. Said they'd rather take a chance on something real than stay aboard a sinking fraud. We spent the next few days gutting La Caseta, dusting off cobwebs, sanding the old pine bar top, repainting the kitchen walls. It was small, just 12 tables, but it felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in months. It felt like home. Meanwhile, Hearth and Grain was flailing. On social media, food bloggers posted photos of deconstructed versions of my dishes. Foams instead of sauces. Microgreens stacked like modernist sculpture. The comment sections were brutal. "What happened to the real menu? This used to be comfort food. Now it looks like science class. Bring Marco back." I stayed quiet. Kept working. Built the new menu by candlelight. Just 5 appetizers, 5 entrees, 3 desserts. All traditional. All from Nona's book. No shortcuts, no substitutes. Then came the phone call. I was painting the front door when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked up. Marco, Sienna's voice said, artificially sweet. "How are you?" I wiped sweat from my brow. "Busy." She hesitated. "We're having some transition challenges. I was wondering if you'd consider a consulting role. just for a couple of weeks, to help stabilize. I didn't say anything. I'll pay well, she rushed in. 45,000 a week. Just 2 weeks. And we'll credit you as consulting chef. It's not about money, Sienna. Then what is it? Her tone snapped. Some kind of wounded pride. I made a business decision, Marco. I'm offering you a chance to help us both. You shouldn't have fired the person who created the dishes you're now trying to recreate. Silence. Then she said, there are nuances missing. You know that. I hung up, then went back to painting. 2 days before her relaunch, Chloe texted me. They're on their 6th attempt at the olive oil cake. Still dense. Still dry. I smiled. That cake took me 2 years to perfect. I adjusted for humidity, egg quality, even how long the batter rested before baking. She couldn't replicate that from a list of ingredients. Because it wasn't about ingredients. It was about feel. That evening, my lawyer cousin Angela dropped by the cafe. I showed her the non-compete clause in my old contract. It stated I couldn't open a similar restaurant concept within 7 kilometers of Hearth and Grain for 2 years. What's similar? She asked. My new place is traditional Italian, not modern American. She nodded. Different enough. Their legal footing is weak. If they push, we push back. I exhaled. A weight lifted. I didn't want war. But I wasn't going to bow either. The next day, Raphael walked into the cafe holding a folded newspaper. Front page of the food section, he said, laying it down. A soulless reinvention, Hearth and Grain's relaunch falls flat. Critics had attended the practice run. It hadn't gone well. One line stood out. The flavors were familiar but lifeless, like a song played by someone who memorized the notes but never understood the melody. That felt like justice. Not loud, not cruel, just true. The night before opening DeLuca's Hearth, I stood in the center of the small dining room alone. 12 tables, each one set by hand. The red and white checkered cloths reminded me of summers in Palermo of my grandmother's tiny trattoria. The soft glow of candlelight flickered against the copper pots we'd hung above the pass, her old ones. Still scratched. Still sacred. The scent of lemon, garlic, and olive oil still lingered from that morning's prep. Everything smelled right. Honest. Like home. We didn't have much. No PR team, no big rollout. Just a post on Chloe's Instagram the day before Marco's cooking again. You know where to find him. And they came. They came in droves. By 5:15 p.m. on opening night, a line had formed around the block. By 6:30, we were fully booked. By 7, however, Mrs. Randall walked in. Her eyes scanned the room like she was afraid it might be a dream. When she saw me behind the kitchen window, her face crumpled. She walked straight to me. No words. She just hugged me. I've been looking everywhere for you, she whispered. I nodded once and said, the veal's just like before. She smiled teary. Good. That night, every plate went out just like Nona taught me. No shortcuts, no spectacle, just depth, precision, intention. Word spread fast. Within days, local journalists started calling. Bloggers posted reviews. One headline read, he left. The soul of Asheville cuisine followed. Sienna didn't respond publicly. But Raphael heard from an old server at Hearth and Grain that the tension in her kitchen had turned toxic. Kevin had quit after the first bad review. Investors were getting nervous. She was losing control. 2 weeks in, I got a package in the mail. A manila envelope. No return address. Inside legal documents. A formal cease and desist letter from Sienna's lawyers claiming I had violated the non-compete clause by opening DeLuca's Hearth within the restricted 7-kilometer radius. I took the papers straight to Angela. She read through them calm and steady. They're desperate, she said, and weak. But can they shut me down? She shook her head. They can try, but I've built our defense around everything. The menu, the branding, the target demographic. We're a traditional Italian kitchen. They're chasing molecular gastronomy now. I blinked. They changed the concept. She nodded. Went full modernist last week. Gels, foams, smoke under glass, trying to salvage something through trend. I leaned back in my chair. So they've already admitted we're not the same. Angela smiled. Exactly. Later that week, a familiar face walked into DeLuca's Hearth. I was behind the line checking pasta dough when Chloe tapped my shoulder. You might want to see this, she whispered. At table 5 sat Harold. The man who first gave me the reins at Hearth and Grain before he sold it to the investment group that brought in Sienna. He stood when I approached. I had to see it for myself, he said. I shook his hand. Welcome. He looked around, took in the smell, the sounds, the atmosphere. Then he looked me in the eyes. This feels like it used to. We sat and talked between courses. He'd retired to the mountains after his wife passed, rarely came back to town. But word had reached him about the collapse, about the comeback. She doesn't understand what she bought, he said of Sienna. She bought your reputation, not your food. She thought they were the same, I replied. They never are. Raphael, Chloe, and Ben stayed late that night even after closing. We cleaned the kitchen in silence, a rhythm between us that didn't need words. After the last pan was scrubbed, Raphael spoke. There's something else, he said. I overheard Sienna the other night. She's calling in more investors, trying to raise money just to cover expenses. She leveraged everything to buy Hearth and Grain. She expected it to flip fast, ride your name to a big exit. But now she's trapped in it. Exactly. Ben added, apparently one of the original investors is threatening to sue her. Claims she misrepresented the brand value. Chloe laughed under her breath. Well, she did. I didn't say anything. Not because I felt pity, not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew at that moment she was finally facing the truth. You can't buy legacy. You have to build it. A week later, a critic from the Asheville Journal came in. I recognized him right away. He'd once written a glowing review about my braised rabbit dish at Hearth and Grain. But this time, he didn't announce himself. He just sat quietly at a corner table and ordered the full-tasting menu. We didn't talk. I just cooked. Every course, every detail done exactly as my grandmother would have done it. I saw him wipe tears from his eyes after the lemon almond tart. When he left, he gave me a subtle nod. No words, just acknowledgement. The next morning, his review went live. The heart of Hearth and Grain didn't vanish. It just moved across town and found its true home at DeLuca's Hearth. By noon, our reservations were full for the next 3 months. 3 months in, we expanded. Angela helped secure the adjoining unit, my grandmother's old bakery space. We converted it into a small cafe for lunch service, while the main restaurant continued to operate evenings. We hired 2 more cooks, another server. The rhythm grew. The momentum felt real. And through it all, I felt whole, for the first time in years. Then one afternoon, a black town car pulled up outside. I was reviewing wine deliveries when Chloe tapped me again. Marco, she said softly. She's here. Sienna. She stepped out of the car, slowly, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She paused at the entrance, scanned the restaurant through the glass. Inside, the lunch rush was humming. Every seat full. Customers laughing. Plates being scraped clean. Staff moving like a single living thing. She stepped inside. Conversations hushed. Customers turned. Even some recognized her. She didn't speak, didn't shout. She just looked. At the food. At the walls. At the copper pots. Then her gaze found me behind the counter. We locked eyes. And for a moment I saw not rage or bitterness, but something else. Resignation, maybe even respect. She gave me a small nod. Then turned. And walked out. I never saw her again. 3 weeks passed after Sienna walked out of my restaurant. We didn't talk again. There was no letter, no call, not even a final threat from her lawyers. But one morning while prepping risotto stock, Angela walked into the kitchen holding a thin envelope. She dropped the lawsuit, she said simply. Just like that. Angela nodded. She's done. And, more importantly, Hearth and Grain is for sale. I blinked. For real. She's cutting her losses. Asking price is less than half of what she paid. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the pot of veal bones slowly simmering on the stove, thinking about all the years I spent in that kitchen. All the hours, all the memory I poured into those walls. Ben, who had just walked in, caught the end of our conversation. You thinking of buying it? No, I said. Not my problem anymore. But even as I said the words, I felt it. That tightening in my chest, that ache. Not desire, not revenge, just full circle. The following week, DeLuca's Hearth hit its 6-month mark. We celebrated quietly. No fanfare. Just a team dinner after service, wine and laughter filling the back of the restaurant like music. Raphael toasted with a half-full water glass. To cooking, like it matters, he said. Everyone clinked their glasses. And then, as I was locking up that night, I found something unexpected taped to the front door. A small padded envelope, no return label. Inside, a handwritten note and a worn leather-bound journal. The note was in my father's handwriting. Your mother told me what you've built. I thought it was time you had this. It belonged to your grandmother. The real one with her notes. I hadn't spoken more than 10 words to my father in years. He'd been furious when I left engineering school. Furious when I chose kitchens over construction. In his eyes, I'd thrown away opportunity for obsession. But this felt like something else. Forgiveness, maybe, or at least recognition. The journal was older than the one I'd used before. The edges were curled. Pages yellowed with time. It smelled like saffron and wood smoke. Inside were recipes I'd never seen. Scribbled observations in Italian. Even a few drawings of plating from the 1950s. But in the very back, folded and faded, was a single photograph. Me, maybe 8 years old, standing beside my grandmother at her stove. I was holding a spoon the size of my head, staring into the pot like it held the future. On the back, in her loopy handwriting, "He cooks with his whole heart, just like me." I sat with that photo for a long time. Some memories don't fade, they deepen. 2 days later, a familiar customer walked in. Mrs. Randall again, but this time she wasn't alone. She brought her grandson. Said he'd recently lost his job and was struggling to find something that felt meaningful. She wanted him to taste what passion felt like. I served them the veal. He didn't speak while eating, barely blinked. After dessert, he stood up and came to the pass. "I want to work here," he said. "Kitchen work is hard," I replied. "It burns people out." "I know," he said. "But it also seems to bring people back to life." I hired him on the spot. The next night, Chloe pulled me aside. "There's someone at table 6 asking for you. Says it's urgent." I wiped my hands and stepped into the dining room. And there he was, my father. Gray suit, hands folded, not looking around, just waiting. I hesitated, then walked over. He stood. "The place looks good," he said. "Thanks. Just like your grandmother's." With a few updates, I replied. He nodded. "But the heart's the same." We stood in silence for a few moments. I could see he was nervous, almost out of place. He'd never once visited Hearth and Grain. Not even when I made the food that won national attention. "I didn't understand it," he said quietly. "Not then." I said nothing. I thought cooking was indulgent, unstable. Something people did until they figured life out. I never realized it could be life itself. Still, I didn't speak. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a brass key. "This is for the vineyard," he said. "The one your grandfather left us in Campania. It's overgrown, forgotten, but it's still there." I stared at it. "You kept it all this time?" He nodded. "Thought I'd do something with it, but maybe it's yours now." He placed the key in my palm and held it there for a second longer than necessary. Then he looked up and said, "Maybe someday, you'll make wine as good as your food." That night, I sat in the dark of the dining room after everyone had gone home. The candlelight danced gently on the copper pots. The scent of rosemary and lemon still lingered in the air. The floor creaked the same way it always had under Nona's feet. I held the key in one hand and the photo in the other. This place wasn't just mine anymore. It was memory. It was future. It was family. But family, on my terms. The next morning, I passed by Hearth and Grain. Its windows were dark. A single paper sign taped to the glass read "Closed. Under new management." The once bustling patio was empty. The garden planters wilted. The name was still there on the sign, but hollow like a song with no melody. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. Later that week, Raphael and I sat on the back steps of the restaurant drinking espresso after service. He nudged my shoulder. "Think you'll ever reopen the vineyard?" "Maybe," I said. "One day." "You know what I think?" he asked. "What?" "I think you already did, in a different form." I smiled, because he was right. What I'd built wasn't just a restaurant. It was a reclaiming of my voice, my work, my legacy. It was a statement that some things love labor memory don't belong in spreadsheets or marketing decks. They belong in the bite of a perfect veal, in the texture of a well-rolled pasta, in the silence that follows a dish done right. 1 year after DeLuca's Hearth opened its doors, we officially expanded into my grandmother's old building. The renovation was finally complete. The space was larger now, capable of seating twice the guests, but nothing essential had changed. We kept the original stone archway she built with her hands. We restored the wooden beam ceiling she once dried oregano from. Her copper pot still hung proudly above the new stove, polished but untouched. The cafe next door stayed open for lunch, but the restaurant, that was for dinner only. For slow nights. For stories retold over pasta and wine. For food that carried memories in every bite. We didn't put up a grand sign, just a brass plate by the door to Luca's hearth. Simple, honest, enough. Opening night at the new space was busier than we'd anticipated. People came in waves. Families who'd followed us from Hearth and Grain. Locals who'd fallen in love with our risottos and roasts. Food tourists who'd read the reviews and wanted to taste the story themselves. We filled the tables quickly, but what mattered most wasn't the crowd, it was the quiet faces. It's faces like Mrs. Randall, who brought a scrapbook of her late husband's travels and shared it over panna cotta. Faces like the couple who met at my old restaurant, now married with a baby asleep in a carrier at their feet. Faces like the new kid we'd hired last month, still learning to julienne properly, who told me in a whisper, "I've never felt this proud doing anything." This place, what it had become, was more than a business. It was a memory stitched back together. Midway through service, Chloe appeared in the kitchen, a strange look on her face. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Corner table by the window." I stepped into the dining room, my apron dusted with flower sleeves rolled to my elbows. I scanned the tables until I saw him, my father. He stood when he saw me, stiffer than usual, still formal. He extended his hand across the table. I ignored it and hugged him instead. For a second, he didn't move. Then he returned the hug. Lightly, carefully, but real. "The place looks good," he said, sitting again. "Thanks. Just like your grandmother had it. With some upgrades." He smiled faintly, "But the heart's the same." We talked. For the first time in years, we actually talked. Not about expectations or disappointments or who was right, but about family, about Nonna, about food, and finally, about me. He admitted he'd been wrong. About cooking, about the restaurant, about thinking stability mattered more than fulfillment. "I was afraid," he said. "Afraid you'd end up lost. That you'd chase dreams and starve." "I did starve," I replied quietly, "but not for food." He nodded. "That part took me too long to see." As he left, he placed something in my hand. A wine cork, faded and brittle. "This is from your grandfather's first harvest," he said. "He kept it all these years. Maybe it's time you pressed your own." That night, I stayed late after everyone had gone. The dining room was dark again, like it had been a year ago, except this time the stillness felt full. Like a breath held in peace, not grief. I sat at the bar with a glass of Amaro, Nonna's favorite, and looked around. The chairs were stacked. The candles snuffed out. But the feeling, it lingered. Like rosemary on the fingertips. On the wall above the bar, framed in oak, was the review that changed everything. The one from the Asheville Journal. The heart of Hearth and Grain didn't vanish. It just moved across town and found its true home. I never responded to that article publicly. But every time I passed it, I felt seen, understood. Not for my technique or success, but for the thing no one could fake. My intent. Weeks passed. Then months. Reservations stayed full. Our small kitchen ran like a metronome, beating steadily with every shift. We didn't chase trends. We didn't host influencer nights. We just cooked. And the people kept coming. Because what we offered wasn't novelty. It was something more rare. Consistency. Warmth. Truth. One rainy morning, I stood outside the restaurant just after dawn. The street was still quiet. Mist curled around the lampposts. And across the road I saw it. The shell of Hearth and Grain. Empty, quiet. Its windows covered with paper. The sign gone. It hadn't reopened. No buyer had come forward. The place that once buzzed with life now stood still. A monument to what happens when you mistake ownership for understanding. I should have felt satisfaction, maybe even victory. But all I felt was gratitude. Gratitude that I'd walked away. Gratitude that I hadn't accepted her offers. That I hadn't compromised. Because sometimes the only way to honor what came before is to start again. With your own hands. 3 months later, we opened a second space, DeLuca's Cantina, built above the vineyard my grandfather left behind in Campania. I used the cork my father gave me as the seal for our first house bottle. The label read, "He cooks with his whole heart." People asked me if I was planning to franchise. I told them no. This wasn't about growth. It was about grounding. About remembering where the flavor came from. In the end, no legal battle was needed. No revenge was necessary. No dramatic confrontation played out in court, because the food did all the talking. The customers chose, the story spoke for itself. And the one thing no one could replicate, no matter how many recipes they stole or brands they bought, was the heart. The heart that came from Palermo kitchens, from flour-dusted sleeves, from hands that remembered what their mothers taught them. The kind of heart that doesn't scream to be seen. It just serves quietly, until someone tastes it and remembers what really matters. Remembering what food meant before it became product.